Let's figure out what's true and what's not true about the second Trump administration's plans for border policy and the millions of asylum applicants and illegal immigrants who migrated into the United States over the past few years. Trump has appointed former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, Tom Homan, to be his border czar. Homan has promised so-called quote-unquote shock and awe on day one, but the message is confusing and undefined. Contrary to what Trump said on the campaign trail, the U.S. military probably won't be involved anytime soon in deportations. That job will fall to ICE, which will focus on people here illegally who are suspected of having committed some serious crimes, as well as gang members, which is the same priority currently under effect under President Biden's administration. They don't plan to break down doors at anyone's homes yet. Homan does, however, suggest that raids on workplaces, a tactic that Biden discontinued after Trump, could come back. There's also a mixed messaging on whether families might be separated because some members have legal status and others don't. Meanwhile, immigration advocates and activists will be availing themselves of remedies in the legal system to slow down those expulsions. What tools do they have? How effective can they be? What will really happen in terms of mass deportations under a second Trump administration? To help us break down the facts, we have Susan Pai. Susan Pai has a degree in psychology from UCLA, where she worked at the internationally recognized UCLA Brain Mapping Lab. She attended law school at the University of Louisville and at Nagoya University in Japan. And she's assisted the Senate Judiciary Committee on fraud and abuse issues and business, immigration, civil matters. She's also submitted testimony to the House Judiciary Committee on humanitarian immigrations issues. Now she's a partner at Cap City Law in Washington State. Susan, thank you so much for joining us here on the TMI Show.
Thank you for joining us. Clearly, you're such a slacker. You're up bright and early for us on the other side of the country, now on the West Coast. Congratulations, making partner.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a really wonderful position that I have here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you and see you back on with us. So, yeah, let's talk about this. Ted, I think you posed a question at the end there. What's the truth about the mass deportation with another Trump administration? What are you hearing in your field of work right now? I mean, I'm sure attorneys all over the country have got to be talking about this, right, Susan?
Yes, I think those of us who practiced during the first Trump administration, know what's to come. We have a realistic idea of what to expect. And secondly, I have personally worked with Stephen Miller when he worked for Jeff Sessions. So he is the architect behind all of the Trump administration's plans for deportation and how to handle immigration, regardless of the fact that Tom Homan is named as the acting. So I think I have a fairly good handle on what's going to happen. In fact, when President Biden passed his executive order for undocumented aliens to become legalized by marriage to a U.S. citizen or being a child or stepchild of a U.S. citizen parent, I warned everybody at the time that executive order came out not to apply because those applications would later be used by the Trump administration to facilitate their deportation. And most certainly that will happen.
Wow. It was a trap.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the Biden administration is also remiss for having done that, knowing that that would be the result.
This is kind of like what happened I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but in the 1930s with no
point that I'm trying to make. And in fact, in certain states like Florida, where I came from, Ron DeSantis has already been collecting many years worth of data regarding undocumented aliens who utilize emergency room services, and most penalized by the federal government.
Do you think, that
versus asylum seekers who are more Central and South America, between 15 to 22 million undocumented aliens in the United States at this time. And we know that the immigration court viewpoint, he could decide that all of those people who have been waiting for their asylum cases for 8, 9, 10 years, he could, in theory, round them all up and put them in detention.
Completely backed up, right? Mm-hmm. So taking the human rights angle away from this, not to mention the dreadful optics of handling, civilians, men, women, and children this way. I mean, logistically, how would the federal government that's already backed up, how would wouldn't they have to build like a gulag archipelago of of detention camps all over the country, transit camps? They'd have to get cooperation from foreign governments to accept these people. I mean, it just seems like a complete logistical nightmare. And not to mention, there are attorneys like you who represent these people who are going to go to the courts and use every possible means of trying to preserve their right to stay in the United States and get a hearing and hopefully a favorable outcome. I mean, it's basically impossible, right?
It's impossible to do everything to the extent that Stephen Miller would like things to be done just because of logistics. So it's a chicken before the egg argument. You can't round up millions and millions of people if you don't have, number one, the officers to round them up, two, cooperation from state governments in order to do so, three, disclosure of information from state governments in order to do so, and four, the detention facilities in which to house them. And some people may remember from the Trump administration previously that they had to set up many detention centers for just only women and children. And as all, many mixed status families were affected, as they will be again. And so you'll have parents being arrested by ICE, put into detention while their U.S. citizen children are in school.
Which, of course, creates all sorts of child protective services issues. So, I mean, what Homan is saying is that they're going to start basically where the Biden administration is now, right? Where they're going to go after people who are suspected of having committed a crime. They're going to go back. Then they're going to go back to the workplace raids, which, of course, obviously will make people scared to go to their jobs. But I would imagine there's also going to be political pushback from their employers, who now are going to have lost their valued employees. They have to be replaced. This is all they're going to have to pay more maybe for Americans U.S. citizens to do these jobs. I mean, I'm just, I guess to paraphrase something that Joe Biden once said infamously, how much will fundamentally change after January 20th? I mean, I imagine it will be more aggressive, but it won't be the military, right? It's going to be ICE. They're already overstressed. They won't get a lot of cooperation. I mean, how much uglier are things going to get?
Well, what I worry about, given the limited resources and limited cooperation from certain states, for example, like Washington State versus Florida, is that they won't go after the high priority targets who are threats to the public, or that are flight risks in terms of like not returning to court or terrorists. What I'm afraid of is, in order to make those numbers really stand out because they're so large, they'll go after the low-hanging fruit. And so that would be parents of undocumented children, or that would be people who have pending applications and where they've admitted that they're undocumented, whether that's through Biden's executive order or another program. I think what you will see that will affect a great majority of people who are here legally now is that Trump will revoke temporary protected status for many, if not all, of the 16 whose citizens now are legally present only by virtue of the temporary protected status granted to them.
Right. And there was another thing, Susan, that people were saying that they were worried about, people that work on the humanitarian side of all of this, was the special app that the Biden administration created, that Trump would immediately do away with that. What kind of havoc would that reap across all the segments of people that are showing up at the southern border and downloading the app, doing the process through the app? Because with Biden's, basically a proclamation is that once you go through that app, you would get TPS. Would just doing away with TPS and doing away with the app, what happens to all those people?
So the app is called Border One, and in effect, it did the same thing under the Biden administration that the Trump administration did, which is meter the number of migrants who appear at the border legally to claim asylum. So doing away with the app is not actually going to make a difference, because Trump will most certainly revert back to metering the number of people who can actually physically go to the border and present for asylum in any case. And then he will also reenact programs like Mexico program, so that even if you do appear for an asylum legally and you claim asylum legally, they will still make you wait in Mexico. Now, I don't know how that program will work out, because Trump's relationship with Labrador, I forgot the Mexican
Lopez
president.
Obrador. Yeah.
Lopez.
Well, he's out now. There's the new president, is the lady Claudia Sheinbaum. She
Yeah.
just was inaugurated. So there is no precedent for the relationship between Trump and Sheinbaum. So I'm curious to see how that would work as well, because Lopez Obrador had been there for so many years, right? So there was an open dialogue. Claudia Sheinbaum, I'm not so sure if she will be receptive to the remain in Mexico policy.
Right. Most certainly, it will depend on the relationship that Trump evolves with the new president of Mexico, because that will have a big difference. That will have a big impact on building the wall, about who pays for the wall, about remaining in Mexico, about metering asylees, about Mexican authorities stopping people who are intending to apply for asylum at the United States. I don't think people in the United States really realize how much of a big part Mexico is in our immigration system.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, right now, under the Biden administration, one of the things that Kamala Harris did was negotiate with the Mexican government to help enforce America's immigration laws not enforce, but prevent asylees from traveling to the U.S.-Mexico border by interceding potential asylees in the southern part of Mexico. And then, of course, letting them stay in the vicinity of the U.S. southern border, and then allowing us to meter the number of potential asylees to present at the border. So I think that the relationship between the United States and many different countries will affect our overall immigration enforcement system. That's something the administration is not very good at. So I don't think they will have much in that regard as the Biden administration had.
And one thing I'd like to address is that our northern border, which I think we often don't discuss with Canada. I recently read a story about a human smuggling case, and obviously the northern border is just as treacherous, but in a different way, because you can literally freeze to death up there very quickly. And I read about an Indian family, a young family with a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they froze to death trying to come across from the north down south to the US. And just this weekend, Justin Trudeau made a comment about saying, if you are an illegal migrant in the United States and you fear Trump coming back to office, he basically said, don't come north. We're not going to take you. We're not going to help you. So, I mean, are we going to see, though, other people, despite whatever Trudeau says, do you think we might see a lot of these asylees or any of these migrants head north, regardless of what Trudeau says, because there is a chance that they won't then be forced to go back to their country of origin?
Absolutely, 100%, and not so much because they'll be effectively deported from the United States, but because they don't want to be detained in an immigration detention center for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years while they wait for their first asylum court appearance, as the system currently is now. And despite what Trudeau says, they have infinitely more protections traveling to Canada than they're going to have traveling to the United States. In fact, they may travel through the United States to make it to Canada.
Susan, the U.S. Constitution grants everybody, including who's on U.S. soil, not just U.S. citizens, anyone. It grants you the right to see a judge quickly, right? How does the immigration system skirt that and detain people for years on end without getting them in front of an administrative judge? Is it because it's technically not a real court, it's an administrative hearing? Or are they just breaking are they just ignoring the Constitution and just going rogue?
Well, there are going to be legal arguments made against the detention of asylum seekers for even greater than 1 year, let alone 8 years. But you are correct. It is different because we're in an administrative court system versus like a federal or state court system. In criminal cases, you often hear the term speedy trial. That does not apply to immigration cases. But that being said, how is it going to be if we hold asylum seekers for 8 years in a detention center? I mean,
when you're representing someone who's in threat of deportation, what kind of remedies, can you do anything besides just delay the inevitable and try to kick the can down the road and keep asking for continuances? I mean, are there means that could lead to a permanent residency for people who came here and maybe their asylum status is stripped away or whatever?
There are, and this happens a lot because asylum seekers are the normal hardship that would inure to a U.S. citizen child if their parent is deported, for example.
So that's not considered extraordinary hardship under a U.S. law for a parent to be removed from, say, their 16-year-old child.
It's always hard to hear the facts delivered by you, Susan, but it's the facts, but it's just
that's
like
why we have you.
this.
Yeah,
that's right. It's a patchwork quilt of, there's federal law, then there's state law, and how they cooperate with one another, and it just seems
it's an
like
inhumane system.
Messy.
I know you're it's hard to see the future. Nobody can. I mean, if you had to predict where we are in a year, though, are we going to be seeing a really broad-based effort, do you think, to deport millions of people? Or is it going to be just sort of a accelerated, greater than what we're seeing now, but something in between?
I think it will be far worse than what we saw the first time that Trump was president. I think that people will be shocked at what happens. You'll see things like the separation of families at the border. You'll see children being placed in detention centers, pregnant women giving birth in detention centers. So I think it will be far worse this time than it was in the first Trump administration.
If I, as a U.S. born in the United States, U.S. citizen, fully vested, if I help an undocumented person, I hide them, if I Anne Frank them, Underground Railroad, am I breaking any laws?
That I can't say under federal law, but I do know under state law. So, for example, as Manila knows, I came from Florida, and I'm close personal friends with Ron DeSantis, or I should say that with a smile. And if you're caught even unknowingly transporting an undocumented alien into Florida, DeSantis passed a law in Florida saying that you would then be guilty of a felony. So I think you're going to see more and more governors of conservative states help to enact laws like that will have severe consequences on not only individuals transporting undocumented aliens, but also on U.S. citizens and U.S. companies who hire undocumented aliens. So, for example, in Florida, again, if you knowingly have an undocumented alien working for you, they can actually take away your business license permanently.
Wow.
Wow.
But here in New York, probably I would be okay.
So New York is like Washington State. We're known as sanctuary states. So what I'm interested in seeing is how will the Trump administration handle the non-cooperation from certain states to the federal government regarding immigration enforcement. So I'll be interested to see how they try to penalize states.
Probably by threatening federal funds for law enforcement,
Yeah.
or from the DOJ, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Susan, we'll make that the last thing, because I know you're busy.
Yeah,
it sounds like it's going to be even busier.
You're about to get busier.
Well, certainly the calls to our office have exponentially increased since Trump became elected.
Wow. Already.
Yeah.
Susan, thank you for your work. And
thank you.
Really appreciate what you're doing very much. Okay, and thanks for coming on. Hope you'll come back soon. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. That's Susan Pye. She's a partner at Cap City Law in Washington State. Susan Pai has a degree in psychology from UCLA, where she worked at the internationally recognized UCLA Brain Mapping Lab. She attended law school at the University of Louisville and Nagoya University in Japan. And she's assisted the Senate Judiciary Committee on Fraud and Abuse Issues in Business, Immigration, Civil Matters. She's also submitted testimony to House Judiciary Committee humanitarian immigration issues. She's done a few things.
Yeah, she's a busy lady, and I appreciate her carving out some time for us, because I mean, she does know the law. It sounds like Ted. I think
Yeah, I think she knows
she
the
might
law.
know some laws.
I would say she
Yeah,
knows the
so
law,
just